Occupational therapy, I guess when I get to this part is what sort of services are available, treatment, lack of a better term, I'm not sure what what the name of it is. Once, say a parent, once family finds out that their child is autistic, what happens from there?
As far as occupational therapy goes, we look at occupation as skills for the job of living. So for a kid, that's playing, getting themselves dressed, feeding themselves, doing the things they need to write in school. So for our children with autism, they may have fine motor delays with how they use their hands. They may have trouble with coordination things like two hands together tying shoes. But most of our kids with autism have trouble with sensory processing. Um, and if you said you're not familiar with
Right, which is?
occupational therapy, sensory processing looks at how we take in information through our senses. We have to do something with that and then make an appropriate response.
Okay.
So we have 8 senses. Most people are familiar with our main 5: eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and touch. The ones that we address a lot with kids that people aren't as familiar with would be the vestibular sense in your inner ear, so our sense of movement, and then the proprioceptive sense, which is the muscles and joints that tell us where we are in space. So we sit down on a chair without falling because our body knows where we are. So it gives you a sense of self with the world. And then the last sense that is newer, that people aren't as familiar with, is the interoception sense, and that's the information that inside our body tells us about our body. So are we too hot? Are we hungry? Do we have butterflies in our stomach because we're nervous, or are we sick? So some of those things where our kids have can either be under-responsive or over-responsive, so they may not notice those things in everyday life, or they may be so sensitive and overreact to those things. So our job as therapists is to figure out how they're taking in information and help them be able to do it more normally so they can do all their day-to-day routines.
I was going to say, because it sounds like this is not a one-size-fits-all
Not at all, no.
way to treat this or deal with this, because different cases and different children are different,
They're
correct?
completely different. They may have trouble in one of those 8 sensory systems. They may have trouble in multiple ones. So every kid's very different. You need extra training for sensory processing. It's a specialized area. So all of our therapists here at Easter Seals are sensory processing trained. Some of those things, they're specialty things even under that. You ask kind of what services. So we do direct outpatient therapy. We see little kids for early intervention in the home. We also do some aquatic-based therapy, and we do sensory-based feeding therapy.
Okay.
So
It says, how long is this ongoing? I mean, I guess that also depends too,
it
right?
completely depends on the kids. So something mild where we're just teaching the family ideas, they may just come for 3 months. We have other kids, as long as there's a functional goal, a thing that we can work on that will improve their quality of life, or how they can participate in getting dressed in the morning or paying attention to sitting and doing tasks. We sometimes will see kids for years if there's a goal that we can address.
I was going to say, there's no set cure to this, right? So,
Correct.
because is this something that could follow them into adulthood as well?
It can, but what we're finding with sensory processing, the earlier you address that, the better. So things like touch processing, we have kids that won't touch Play-Doh or shaving cream, so preschool's a horrible place. Think of, how fun that is to get messy, but it's horrible for our kids. So they won't touch food, they won't let you wash their hair, things like that. You can really work on desensitizing that, where they may be picky with certain types of clothes, but they don't have those same reactions. So there are big changes you can make. Other areas, like if you have lower muscle tone, where it's hard to use your muscles, you may always have lower muscle tone, but we can build up your strength or help you with the coordination piece that goes along with it.
How do you help the parents along? Because it sounds like there's a lot of patience, a lot of understanding that goes with this. I guess we're in this really quick society. Okay, we want a quick fix, and this is going to be done tomorrow.
Right.
where it obviously it's not. So how do you work with the parents?
We start that all the way from evaluation of getting really focusing here. We focus on client and family centered goals. So they may have a variety of areas of concern, but we really look at what is important to that family and focus on it. And having the parents involved is a big piece. In some therapy settings, parents, it's kind of a drop-off service. You know, they want you to fix their kid. Our point is they're the expert on their child. They're with them all the time. And what they do with us maybe for an hour a week doesn't make a big change if they're not doing things at home. So our focus is really on parent education, teaching them what they can do. We give them home programming sheets that have information. We can give them activity ideas. Some families want lots of paper. Some want one picture of one thing to kind of focus on. So it really depends on the family, but I would say the parent involvement is really key of teaching them the things to try with the kids, checking in the next week. What did you guys do this week? Problem solving if we need to change things. So we sometimes will give parents, not a sticker chart, but same idea, you know, like a log of, did you do these things to kind of keep them accountable also? But we really are trying to empower them to understand their kid and how to have that relationship with their child. Some of our kids, they, you know, if they don't like touch, they may not like hugs. They may not talk, so that telling someone I love you. So we want to be able to build that relationship where the families figure out how they can play with their kids. Even if it's different, we want them to have that relationship and understanding.
Oh gosh, I had so many questions. Now I
Sorry.
just lost my train of thought, derailed. What's the most common maybe question or concern that you get from parents?
Related to kids with autism?
Mm-hmm.
I think starting out, a lot of times parents you have such a picture of your kid's life, and especially with a new diagnosis, they have no idea. So they often are asking us, you know, will my kid ever be able to live on their own? Will they ever be able to have a job? It may be, will they ever be able to ride a bike? And every kid is very different. Most kids, they meet those milestones. It's just in their own time. So we have to explain how, you know, every kid is different. These are the things we're going to do to help your child. But I would say those are the big questions that we get that unfortunately nobody can answer, but we can at least give them the education information, know the steps to look for, explain why they have to do certain developmental milestones to be able to reach that goal. So the more they understand what they need to do and what our role is, I think the better that answers that question.
Then obviously it's probably easier for you, quote unquote, the earlier that it's recognized that this is what the problem is, and that parents just shouldn't just say, oh, they'll outgrow it.
Yes. So, you know, some parents do have more of the wait and see idea, and that's okay too. But the earlier we catch it, often kids have trouble with communication skills, those self-help skills, the sensory things. So we can definitely make changes the earlier, and also the earlier they can understand their child's behavior. We see families later that say, well, they've always done this and we've never known why. So just being able to give more answers instead of them just over time getting more questions.
Is the behavioral aspect that might be a problem, is that the longest probably to deal with rather than fear of touch or something like that, or language?
It really depends. They can be so interrelated. So I think there's so many causes for behavior. I know Caitlin will talk about that more. We look a lot of trying to figure out what is sensory compared to what is behavior. Because think if you can't communicate, are you frustrated when someone doesn't know what you want? You may act out that way. If they're asking you to eat a food that you are bothered by touching but can't tell them, is that more of a behavior because of being sensitive to something? So I would say it's tricky, but those behaviors are tied kind of across all of those developmental barriers and problems. And I would say behavior, attention, those things are more difficult to deal with, but definitely we have strategies for that too.
I don't know if I have anything else to add. Anything you need to add? I didn't ask. I'm sure there's a lot that I didn't ask that you need to say.
a lot of what I think is tricky because, like you said, you're not as familiar with occupational therapy, you're not as familiar with sensory processing. The big thing, we see lots of kids with sensory processing problems that don't have autism, but the majority of kids that have autism have sensory processing concerns. So they can be completely separate, but there is a very high prevalence of sensory processing problems with kids with autism. And I would say, related to that, those difficulties definitely affect their ability to transition between activities, to do the day-to-day routines that their families need, you know, to be able to go out to eat, to be able to go places. So our job is really to work with the family on that participation.
Let me ask you a question. I'll probably ask Caitlin too. What do you say to someone like me who has not been around this before, who may see a child that is autistic? What do you say to somebody like me as to how to react to whatever is happening?
I feel like in general there needs to be a lot more community education. What we hear from parents so often is how judged they feel, whether that's because their kid eats 3 foods total, and so they're looked at, why are you feeding your kids chips every day, you know, from someone walking past, or some of those behavior things. We know places where you're bombarded with sights, smells, tastes, sounds. Those are usually places in public where we do see kids have meltdowns or have a hard time. And parents are often looked at like they're either being a bad parent or they don't know how to handle it, where they may be doing the best they can for it. So I think sometimes we see a bigger kid throwing a fit that looks like a 2-year-old, and we automatically look at the parents, where I think we just need to be more understanding of these kids do have a harder time with transitions, with busy environments. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad kid, and it doesn't necessarily mean the parents don't know how to handle it.
And you don't want the parents to hide the kids,
right?
And say you just have to stay home and we can't take them anywhere.
Yeah. So I think, you know, the biggest thing would be not making negative comments towards parents, or, you know, more that giving them dirty looks and judging them because of what their child is doing. They're already embarrassed that their kid's throwing a fit in public when they're 8.